Coming up on New Day at Arirang, as COVID-19 cases continue to soar in South Korea, the country starts new strengthened antivirus restrictions in a bid to stem the spread. Today's new infections forecast to be around 4,000. At least 17 countries in Europe have now confirmed cases of the new Omicron variant. As a result, numerous governments impose their own strict antivirus restrictions. Plus, an eruption of Indonesia's Semeru volcano kills over a dozen people and injures scores more on the island of Java. Rescue teams are searching for victims under thick layers of ash.
Hello and welcome to this Monday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on December 6th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gan.
And I'm Brim. Over the next 60 minutes, we will take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. We are going to start with the latest on the COVID-19 situation in South Korea. Over the past week, the daily average of new infections has reached nearly 4,600. Also, with the highly transmissible Omicron variant in the country, authorities have just imposed from today stronger antivirus measures that will remain in place for the next 4 weeks.
Yes, and for more on this and other related updates, joining us is our reporter Shin Yin in the studio. Good morning, Yin.
Good morning.
As always, Yin, let's start with the figures for today. What are we expecting?
Right, so Mo-gan, even though we're just coming back from the weekend when the caseload is usually lower due to fewer tests done, we've seen a pretty high figure. Up to 9 p.m. Sunday, the country reported 3,887 new COVID-19 infections. This was 119 fewer than what had been reported the same time the day before, but up by more than 1,100 from the same time last week. So we're expecting to see Monday's COVID-19 tally hover somewhere in the 4,000s. And though we don't know the exact number of critically ill patients, we're most likely to see the number stay above the 700 mark for the 6th day straight. On Sunday, 744 were in critical condition, of which 80% were over 60 years old.
Now, we are hearing from the authorities that they think they do have enough ICU beds at the moment, but were officials prepared for this sudden spike in the number of critically ill patients?
Well, nationwide, nearly 80% of all hospital beds are being used to treat COVID-19 patients that are critically ill. The Seoul and Incheon area has especially seen a shortage with more than 91% of all of their beds filled. So yes, COVID-19 has put a strain on medical capacity, prompting at-home treatment to be advised as a norm. So COVID-19 patients that haven't shown any symptoms or just mild ones have been asked to treat themselves at home for 10 days. They're basically given home treatment kits and are monitored by nearby medical facilities with oxygen levels and body temperature checked a few times a day. If these facilities find any abnormal symptoms, they will then bring these patients into the hospital.
And yeah, over the weekend, we've seen some more infections of the highly contagious Omicron variant.
Right.
Tell us more on that.
Right, and in a few hours, we'll know just how many more have been infected with the Omicron variant. But up to Sunday, we saw 3 more infected in Seoul, bringing the total number of cases to 12. The 3 were all international students studying at universities in Seoul. They had reportedly visited the church in Incheon, where the first Omicron case was detected. One came into contact with a total of 139 students in the library and 30 more at an offline class. So we'll have to wait and see whether and just how much the Omicron variant has spread outside of Incheon area.
Now, South Korea, as a result of this spike and the Omicron variant, had to pause its gradual return to living with COVID. And now we have these new stricter restrictions that came into effect from today. Just walk us through how these are going to affect everyday people here in South Korea.
Well, the biggest change is the number of people that can meet up for a social gathering. In the capital region, only 6 people will be able to meet, which is down from 10. And in other regions, only 8 can meet, which is reduced from 12. Only 1 unvaccinated person will be allowed per group in all regions. And this measure will last for 4 weeks. Also, vaccine passes will now be required in restaurants and cafes. Currently, these so-called passes have only been required for people entering venues like indoor sports facilities, bars, nightclubs, singing rooms, and public baths. But now, people who want to eat out, go to a museum, watch a movie at a theater, or even study at cram schools must provide proof of vaccination. If they're not vaccinated, they must submit a negative PCR test taken within 2 days. However, passes will still not be required for weddings, funerals, department stores, supermarkets, and outdoor sports facilities. And a 1-week grace period for this latest measure will remain from today.
All right, Yoon, thank you so much for the packed report. We'll talk to you again tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, as Omicron raises global concerns about a surge in infections, some countries like Israel and Brazil are accelerating their booster rollouts, with some even reviewing the possibility of authorizing a 4th shot of the vaccine.
This comes as over 180 Omicron cases have been identified across Europe. Kim Hyo-sun has the story.
As concerns rise over the rapid spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control says 182 cases have been identified across the EU plus Norway and Iceland. As of Sunday, it added the new variant has been reported in 17 of the countries it serves. The ECDC explained the majority of the cases are in people that have a history of traveling to Africa, but noted there's evidence in several European countries, such as Germany and Spain, which shows undetected community transmission could be ongoing there. It says all cases for which there is available information on severity were either asymptomatic or mild, adding no deaths have been reported so far. Israel says it's mulling the possibility of authorizing a 4th COVID-19 booster shot to those with weak immune systems. In July, those undergoing cancer treatment in Israel were the first to receive a 3rd shot. Saying the health authorities are due to discuss a 4th dose this week, local media outlets say officials are concerned about the spread of the Omicron variant. Brazil is also accelerating its rollout of booster shots in an attempt to contain the spread of the new strain. The Sao Paulo state government says it will shorten the interval for a 3rd dose to 4 months from the previous 5. 6 cases of Omicron have been reported in Brazil, with all of them having recently returned from Africa. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. South Korea's new COVID-19 cases remained over the 5,000 mark for the 2nd straight day on Sunday after hitting a record high on Saturday. Now, this spike coming as concerns rise about the spread of this Omicron variant. Omicron infections, as we've been talking about, have already been confirmed here in South Korea. But for now, at least, the number isn't really rising that quickly, especially compared to other countries.
However, while experts are cautioning that it's too early to draw conclusions, some are asking whether this new strain might cause milder illness than its predecessors. For more, we connect to Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Mary Women's Hospital in Seoul. Good morning, Dr. Tan.
Good morning.
Now, a small study in Europe showed half of the Omicron patients had no symptoms and half had mild symptoms with no severe disease, hospitalization, or death. Now, it's far from conclusive, but if the data is correct, should we hope Omicron becomes the dominant strain?
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all of our listeners that we are still very, very early in the process of gathering information about how the Omicron variant behaves. All we need to do is actually look back at how the pandemic first played out in our country. We had our first case January 20th, 2020. It wasn't until one full month later that Korea experienced our first fatality after having logged 104 cases. And up until that time, for that first month, we thought perhaps this was a very mild disease that perhaps we didn't have to worry about. So I think right now, for our experience with Omicron in Korea, it's still too early to say. Fortunately, all of the 12 confirmed cases of Omicron in our country have mild disease. So that's at least a little bit reassuring, but we don't know really what's going to happen once the variant hits potentially vulnerable populations. There are 2 women greater than 60 years old who have suspected disease in Korea. We'll be watching their clinical course very carefully. But if we look at what's going on in South Africa, of course, their cases have soared from 116 back in November 8th. Now they're greater than 16,000 cases. Their hospitalizations have also increased by 6 times in that same period of time, over 1 month. So Omicron may not be as innocuous as some of us think. And then, of course, there's that question of long COVID. We have no idea whether or not infection with the Omicron variant will cause long COVID disease. And from what we are gathering, long COVID is a disease that we really need to take very seriously.
Yeah, and just looking back at how previous COVID-19 variants have spread, do you think we can say with any degree of certainty that Omicron will become the dominant strain around the world, or is there a chance it might peter off like some others have?
Well, there are 2 factors that determine whether or not a variant will claim dominance. One is the inherent transmissibility of the virus, or the reproductive number, and we'll have a better idea of what that number is, I think, in the coming days to weeks. The other factor is the level of mitigation efforts in any population. And basically in Korea, since November 24th until today, we've had slightly increased restrictions, but during this whole about 1 week period, the virus has had pretty much open access to our entire country. So I think it's only a matter of weeks to months before the Omicron variant becomes dominant, at least in South Korea, as it's becoming in South Africa and quite possibly throughout the world.
And Dr. Tan, you mentioned that it's still too early to know much more about Omicron, but as of now, do we have any idea if Omicron is resistant to the COVID-19 vaccines we currently have? And even if that's still unclear, do you think it's better for people to get a booster shot sooner because of the emergence of Omicron?
Yes, so of the 12 confirmed cases in South Korea, 2 were fully vaccinated individuals and 2 were partially vaccinated individuals. The information out of South Africa is that they are seeing a lot of cases of reinfection with COVID-19 due to the Omicron variant. So it does look like there is definitely immune escape with the Omicron variant. That being said, the vaccines, there are 3 different levels of effectiveness. Is it effective against infection? Is it effective against hospitalization? And is it effective against death? The Omicron variant may cause some of our vaccines to be less effective against infection, but we have a lot of hope that our vaccines will be effective against hospitalization and death. Therefore, the best thing to do is to get your booster as soon as you're eligible. And the other thing to remember is the Delta variant is still the dominant strain. We still need to protect against the Delta. And the best way to do that is to get the booster shot.
And finally, Doctor, we can let you go without mentioning the new restrictions coming in force from today, limiting private gatherings to 6 people in the capital area for a 4-week period. Different numbers of people can meet in other parts of the country. But most public facilities will be added to businesses that require that you show a proof of vaccination or a negative test for entry, that negative test taken within the past couple of days. Do you think these steps will be effective in taming or stemming this surge we're seeing?
I think these efforts will have a minimal effect. Given what we know about the Omicron variant and how infected people have high viral loads and few symptoms, it's quite possible that our current mitigation efforts will not be enough to curb the spread of Omicron. Of course, any effort that we do make, will help, but I doubt that it will be enough to keep our hospitals open, fully operational. It's only a matter of time because we're still seeing thousands, almost 2,000 people diagnosed every day who are greater than 60 years old. We had more than 800 admissions to the hospital yesterday alone. So it's really, I think, just a matter of time before we have to pull the brakes again.
Right. Dr. Tan, as always, we're grateful for your insights and thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Now, since the start of the pandemic, travelling to other countries has been difficult, if not impossible.
But the introduction of the so-called travel bubbles, people can now travel freely, but with certain restrictions to selected destinations. Our Cho Won-jung reports on the one between South Korea and Singapore.
Volcanic mountains and a beautiful coastline with stretches of white sand attract visitors to South Korea's southern island of Jeju. But this place, known for its nature beauty, has been almost off limits for foreign travelers in the COVID-19 era.
For nearly a year and 9 months, Jeju was closed to group tours from other countries due to the pandemic, but today, the door has finally been reopened.
In 2019, South Korea had over 17 million foreign visitors, but after the pandemic hit, the figure dropped by nearly 86%. For outbound travel, more than 28 million people took a trip before the pandemic, but that also fell significantly last year.
COVID-19 pandemic is a direct hit against airlines. It caused the majority of routes to be closed. So as a country that relies on international travel, this is a fatal situation.
Why has Jeju reopened its border this time? It has created a travel bubble, or vaccinated travel lane, which is an agreement between 2 or more countries to open up their borders for travel without mandatory quarantine. The process of traveling under the agreement varies from country to country. However, those who would like to travel to South Korea need to go through 3 COVID tests. They must take a PCR test within 72 hours of departure, 1 upon arrival, and the final test on the 6th or 7th day if they will stay for 8 days or more. They also need a couple documents such as a negative PCR test result, an official COVID-19 vaccination certificate, and a copy of their travel medical insurance. Under the South Korea and Singapore travel bubble agreement that kicked off on November 15th, 20 people from Singapore arrived on Jeju Island. Usually, group tours travel around the island by bus.
But to be extra careful amid the pandemic, these electric vehicles are ready to transport members of the tour guide on their adventures.
On to the next stop. These 2 members of group tour said they're fans of Korean dramas.
There was a lot of Korean dramas that keep us entertained during the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
We were watching a lot of it on Netflix, on View, and the different channels. So obviously, Squid Game was all the rage as well recently, right? Yeah, and we were like, oh my God, we need to come here for Gongyu.
But what made you guys decide to, hey, I want to go to Korea?
And when we looked at the situation, we thought, Korea's situation was actually quite similar to Singapore, where we were still practicing safe distancing with our mask on, and everybody was just quite prudent, right? So we thought, you know what, maybe Korea, it's a safer choice. So we decided to give Korea a try. And I mean, we like Korea.
For me, I'm still a little scared to travel internationally. Were you scared at all?
300 meters,
we do feel
turn right.
a bit nervous because it's been 2 years since we've been traveling, right? So there's a little bit of getting used to that.
Once they arrived at one of the tour spots, the excitement began. They took photos, ate desserts, drank coffee, and most importantly, enjoyed some good quality time together. The one traveler who brought his whole family on the trip said he felt very confident doing so.
This is where we wanted to visit before even the pandemic. So once it becomes available, it's a natural choice for us.
According to Seoul's Culture Ministry, more than 1,000 Singaporean visitors came to South Korea just within a week, and this is 33 times that of the previous several months. However, the world is facing another COVID curveball. The Omicron variant is putting international travel once again in jeopardy. But that didn't stop some visitors due to the travel bubble agreement.
I was in Singapore for a long time, but it's been almost 2 years since I last visited there. I booked my flights as soon as possible when online sales opened up.
지금 사실 오미크론 변이주가 이렇게 좀 심각하고 있잖아요. 그거에 대해서 좀 걱정 없으셨어요, 여행 가면서?
I watched the news about it yesterday. Of course I was worried, but I still want to go while being careful.
So far, South Korea has already imposed travel restrictions on countries with high risk of Omicron variant. Starting December 3rd for 2 weeks, all overseas visitors must go through a 10-day quarantine, even if they're fully vaccinated. For the worst-case scenario, this so-called circuit breaker could put the travel bubble agreement in jeopardy again. Some tourism businesses think the travel bubble should continue.
If we close our borders, it will bring more negative impacts, not only psychologically but also economically. I think we should feel more confident and open up international travel if countries under the travel bubble agreement follow prevention measures well. That's the fastest way to save the tourism industry.
Global pandemic is far from over, but the travel bubble could be the turning point for international travel in the COVID-19 era. And maybe this could give people a little bit more breathing room to travel internationally in less stressful conditions. 최원정, 아리랑 뉴스.
A U.S. official says Iran has backtracked on all of its previous compromises regarding reviving the 2015 nuclear deal, adding Tehran is even making fresh demands. The senior State Department official also warned Iran that the U.S. will not allow it to, quote, slow walk the negotiations, while at the same time ramping up its nuclear activities at home. Echoing recent comments by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the official also questioned whether there is any chance of reviving the Obama-era deal. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says that in strengthening its ties with its allies, including South Korea, Australia, and Japan, the United States is not seeking to build an anti-China coalition or an Asian version of NATO. Austin was speaking in California over the weekend at the Reagan National Defense Forum. However, he also said the U.S. is committed to maintaining its capacity to resist any resort to force that would jeopardize the security of Taiwan. He said the U.S. faces a formidable challenge, and recent military actions by China near Taiwan look a lot like rehearsals. Austin was in Seoul last week, where he and his South Korean counterpart agreed on the importance of peace and security in the Taiwan Strait, a sign widely seen as an expansion of the scope of the Seoul-Washington alliance.
Former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon will attend the Beijing Winter Olympics in February in his role as chair of the International Olympic Committee Ethics Commission. According to one of his aides, Ban expressed a willingness to attend the Games during an interview with Chinese state media. Speaking to Seoul-based Yonhap news agency, his aide said Ban's attendance is a matter for the chair of the IOC Ethics Commission, not as a representative of any particular country. Ban was re-elected for a 4-year term in July, a position he's held since 2017. The price of LPG as fuel for vehicles, heating and cooking has risen by the most since 2014 in South Korea, despite tax cuts to try and bring down prices. According to Yonhap News, citing industry sources, the price of liquefied petroleum gas in May 2020 was a little under 700 Korean won a kilogram. That's about 60 US cents. But this month it's double that at around $1.20. The government cut taxes on LPG by around 6 cents in November, but that has since been wiped out by another price increase of about 7.5 cents. Rising in line with global oil prices, LPG is expected to be a burden for consumers in the winter when demand is high, but the price is expected to ease somewhat in January.
And now we cross over to our Oh Seung for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. Now it's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Well, South Korea on Sunday marked the Day of Trade, and this year, as the nation expects a record number of exports, there was much to celebrate. The number of exports expected to exceed $636 billion according to the Korea International Trade Association. Now, despite the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and various hindrances to global trade, the country's outbound shipments are forecast to grow 24.1% on year in 2021. But can the trade-dependent country keep up its growth momentum? To discuss this today, we invite Song Soo-young, Professor of Economics at Chungang University, and we also have joining us today James Rooney, Vice Chairman of the Seoul Financial Forum. Very warm welcome to you both. And well, let's begin with you, Professor Song. Now, recent trade numbers show that exports in November for South Korea soared 32.1% from a year earlier, and that's the sharpest rise since August, beating the 27.7% growth seen in some polls. Now, that also marked a 9th consecutive month of double-digit growth, which of course has been largely attributed to semiconductor chips and petrochemicals. Do you see this upward trend continuing for the time being?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. And I believe the answer, first of all, the answer to your question about the upward trend, I expect it will continue for the time being, as long as actually the outbreak of Omicron would turn out to be some bad omens for the world economy. Maybe depending upon whether the severity of the Omicron and the speed of the Omicron's contagion. But however, at least for the time being, the Korean economy has shown, as the data shows, that the huge increase of the export, and for the 9 consecutive month, we have seen some very strong resilience of the international recovery of the export. And also, but I think this effect actually a little bit exaggerated because of the multiplication effect between the inflation and the soaring price of the exports, and combined together with increased volume. So the trend will continue in at least the first part of the 2022, and so I expect also the world economy also will come back to some normal path to the recovery. I hope so.
Mr. Rooney, well, the numbers do seem pretty optimistic and seem to be set to continue for the time being. I mean, South Korea having ratified the world's largest trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership deal. What kind of benefits is RCEP going to bring South Korea once it goes into effect in February?
I think the RCEP is a good initiative, but I don't expect it to have a significant and immediate benefit to Korea. I think the dynamics going on in the world are so extreme that the small benefits that we can expect from the RCEP will kind of get submerged in the noise from all the other things that are going on. I fully agree that, there's strength in semiconductors that's benefiting Korea. I also hope that we will see strength in automobiles because of the arrival of new electric vehicles that Korea has some good positions in. But the countries that the RCEP represent are not the largest ones in the world. They are countries that we already do business with, and simply we're going to get benefits at the margin.
And well, Professor Song, there's another massive regional trade deal under discussion, and that's the CPTPP, of course. And now there's long been a lingering discussion over whether South Korea is going to join this mega trade deal. How is the South Korean government actually pursuing this?
Okay, let me start with some background of the emergence of CPTPP against the RCEP. Currently, the worldwide free trade agreement region is divided into four: the NAFTA and the European Union and the RCEP and the CPTPP. So I believe the CPTPP was initiated by the U.S. In order to counterbalance the RCEP. Actually, RCEP has been comprised with the countries, the underdeveloping countries, middle countries, and the highly developed countries. So, to that regard, this could be a very good opportunity for South Korea and to exploit, to connect the trade with some underdeveloped countries and the middle-income countries and the highly developed countries. But CPTPP has some overlapping with some NAFTA and some other types of the free trade agreement, particularly between the Chile and the United States and the U.S. and Mexico. So I believe the U.S. might use this CPTPP as a leverage to impose some favorable agreements for the NAFTA between U.S. and Canada. That's because Canada has been very reluctant to join the CPTPP. But however, right now, the U.S. has not applied yet for the CPTPP. So now the Korea is just a potential applicant for the CPTPP. But however, the China has applied for the to be a member of the CPTPP. So that is, I think, implicitly objected by Japan, and I don't think the U.S. also would like to participate in the CPTPP. So whether we have to wait and see what is the development of the CPTPP in the future. So that's my suggestion.
Sure. And well, geopolitical complications are certainly there surrounding the CPTPP. And Mr. Rini, well, it's to South Korea's understanding that Japan doesn't want South Korea to be part of it. And of course, the two countries since 2019, they've been caught up in a trade war over some historical issues, and the conflict has indeed hurt both sides. But with South Korea depending heavily on Japanese machinery and equipment for really key items to South Korean trade, including semiconductor chips and electronic devices, what really should be done?
Well, I think what you're touching upon is some very complex issues. Certainly, the history between Japan and Korea has a number of dimensions that could do with significant improvement, and I think politically Japan has been sort of disturbing the neighborhood to some degree by resisting recognition of some of the historical complications, both between Japan and Korea and between Japan and China. However, I like to say that I don't do politics. I focus on economics and business conditions, and I think the path through the woods here is to try and be pragmatic about things that are of economic value, whilst continuing to sort of wrestle with the more complex challenges that are, in a sense, social in nature and social and political in nature.
And well, Mr. Rini, the United States also, that's South Korea's second largest trading partner. Well, many hope to see the Biden administration remove some of the tariffs or trade actions that the Trump administration had taken previously. But Mr. Biden doesn't seem to be in a rush to undo these Trump-era tariffs or trade actions on items such as steel and aluminium, nor join multilateral deals like the CPTPP. What do you make of this?
Well, again, I'm very much in favor of free trade and of active cooperation economically between countries all around the world. So I would sort of count myself as being disappointed that the new administration hasn't removed some of the unnecessary barriers from its predecessor administration. I think that the U.S. economy actually needs needs improvement in its terms of trade, and U.S. manufacturers need to be able to source from anywhere in the world at the lowest possible cost. So, I think we have to be frank, a little disappointed in the U.S. administration thus far on this area.
Well, Professor Song, it looks like the United States, Taiwan, many other countries in the European Union, they're all looking to get into the semiconductor business. And, well, it's long been said that South Korea needs to diversify its export items. But we still pretty much depend very overwhelmingly on the chip business. What do you think is the way forward?
Yeah, because currently the semiconductor industry, particularly, is real demand is very huge, and so expected to be very large, remain very large demand for the semiconductor because of the digital economy, and the digital technology will be of use in the future. So, considering that situation, I do not worry much about that. But as far as I'm concerned, out of the 15 key elements of the exports from South Korea, the 13 items has shown there's very strong surge on the demand in the worldwide, and the semiconductor and the petrochemicals, particularly the vessels, the shipbuilding has been very prevalent, and we have witnessed almost a 250% increase. The order from out of the Mozambique and the even underdeveloped countries need some kind of those ships. And so I think the diversification of the exports is not should not be limited just to some products, but I think the more important is the rather than diversification of the exporting areas, because actually the European Unions and North Americas and some of the countries in North Africa, they are in need of some high-level, high-quality products. So the South Korean economy would focus on the exporting the high-quality and high value-added products to the world. So that, to that regard, I do not much worry about the diversification of the areas, and items are not much in immediate need right now.
Well, Professor Song, it looks like it's been quite a good year for South Korean exporters. But what risk do the ongoing supply chain crisis around the world, the energy crisis, and also Omicron pose to South Korea's exports?
Yeah, as mentioned in the earlier news, and that the LPG gas price, and because we depend too much on some imported oil. So, however, that effect will be diminished because we have already witnessed some declining Western Texas Intermediate future price and worldwide. So, as long as the digitalization of the economy continues, and then the demand of the oil and the LPG would be reduced, and with the development of the economically friendly energy, such as the windmill, electricity, and other types of eco-friendly energy, electricity is developed, then that would give some pressure on the price of the oil. So that would turn out to be beneficial to the Korean economy in the future.
And well, Mr. Rini, while it looks like South Korea's exports have done pretty well, it seems that bringing in investment hasn't been so successful compared to previous years. According to the UN's trade body's 2021 report on FDI and investments, apparently South Korea's FDI inflow and greenfield investments, they've been on a steady decline since 2018. Why do you think this is, and how do you think this should be addressed?
So I think there are several very important points for us to keep in mind here. And before we move away from it, I'd like to emphasize what was just said about renewable energy. Korea needs to actively and aggressively develop its renewable energy sources from solar and wind because these can replace the oil imports at a very beneficial effect for the country. And we can use those energy sources to power electric vehicles, which are, of course, cleaner as well, and we're a great manufacturer of them. The second thing is that whilst we talk about Korea's exports to the rest of the world, increasingly Korean companies are going and establishing themselves in those other countries. And so we have this effect of Korea actively participating in the larger world economy, but not through the export channel, more through the direct investment channel ourselves. And that, of course, brings back profits to Korea. It brings back value added in a number of ways that are not necessarily easy to track simply by looking at the export numbers. And then thirdly, to address your question, this has been a very difficult several years, 2020 and 2021, in terms of any kind of global travel. So I think, the FDI activity obviously requires people to come and go, for people to examine opportunities. And I think we should not be too surprised with a slump in FDI activity whilst everybody has been going through that and is still sort of reassessing how to come out of it. I don't think we can count on an automatic rebound in next year and the years to come, but I think we should actively pursue that rebound, especially in areas where we are strong. Korea has taken leadership positions in some new technologies that matter very much for the future economy, and I'm thinking particularly, of course, the whole electric vehicle area, where we have world-leading battery makers here in Korea. Is that going to be an opportunity for FDI? We'll have to see. But I think we've got to play to our strengths, and we've got to overcome this sort of COVID limitation by getting back into business on this whole international communications frontier, which obviously FDI depends upon.
Well, we're going to have to end it here, I'm afraid. That was Hong Soo-young, Professor of Economics at Chungang University, and James Rooney, Vice Chairman of the Seoul Financial Forum. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Wrapping up their 4 concerts in Los Angeles, BTS has left a string of Billboard records in their wake, showing once again how popular K-pop and Korean culture is becoming around the world. Han Seung-woo has the story.
K-pop sensation BTS's 4 concerts at the SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California sold 214,000 tickets and grossed a whopping $33 million, the most for any run of shows at a single venue in the world since 2012. According to Billboard boxscore, Permission to Dance on Stage Los Angeles, which ended Thursday local time, recorded the biggest US-based box score in 18 years, and the second biggest ever in North America, only behind Bruce Springsteen's 10-show marathon at Giant Stadium in New Jersey. Overall, BTS has landed the 6th best grossing engagement in box score history. Billboard defines their box score as a report of all shows that an act plays at a single venue during a given tour or during a leg of a tour, excluding festivals, based on figures reported to Billboard. The music magazine also reports that what separates the boy band from other members of the $30 Million Club, like U2 and the Spice Girls, is that no other act had cracked the Hot 100 charts top 20 in the 5 years before their $30 million grosses. Another distinction, BTS is the first and only historically non-English act to top the 20 million mark in one engagement. The streets of Los Angeles, following the group's concerts, were teeming with fans eager for more.
We like to keep them for mementos of like a good time, a good family trip and memories that we've had going to the concert. It was really nice.
The thirst for K-pop is amazing. We've witnessed firsthand how strong a fan base K-pop and Korea culture have.
It's proof of just how mainstream K-pop and Korean culture, including K-drama, food, and beauty, is becoming across the globe, with BTS leading the charge. 한성우, Arirang News.
Now, in sports news, Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors have become the first team in the history of the league to win the K-League Championships for 5 years straight. The team beat Jeju United 2-0 at Jeonju World Cup Stadium on Sunday, finishing the season with 76 points to claim the historic title. Jeonbuk now hold 9 championships. That's more than any other club. Ulsan Hyundai FC finished second to Jeonbuk for the 3rd year in a row.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. At least 14 people are dead and over 100 others injured after Mount Semeru, a volcano located in Indonesia's East Java province, erupted on Saturday. According to the country's National Board for Disaster Management on Sunday, the eruption left dozens in a serious condition after it covered villages with ash and left people running from billowing clouds of debris. 5 of the victims have yet to be identified, while 9 others are reported missing. Some 1,300 people have been displaced by the eruption, as hundreds of houses have been completely destroyed, with 33 schools damaged as well. Officials say the situation in the region remains dangerous, as pyroclastic flows, a mix of ash, rock, and volcanic gases, can be much more dangerous than lava. Authorities fear there could be more casualties, as a number of miners working near the site of the eruption have yet to be found. Standing at more than 3,650 meters high, Mount Semeru is the tallest mountain on Java. What started out as another morning of protest for citizens of Yangon against the brutal crackdown by the military turned deadly Sunday morning when Myanmar security forces in a car rammed into the anti-coup protest, killing 5 people and leaving dozens other injured. Photos and videos circulating on social media show a vehicle crashing through the protesters, with witnesses saying the car increased speed as it got closer to the protesters. Witnesses say that a handful of people, some who were carrying banners in support of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi, were hit, as soldiers then jumped out of the car and began shooting as protesters began fleeing. Sunday's protest was one of at least 3 being held in Yangon, Myanmar's biggest city, as the rallies were held a day ahead of an expected verdict in the first of several criminal cases against the country's civilian leader. More than 10 months since the coup, the military has reportedly killed more than 1,300 people. CNN fired its news anchor Chris Cuomo on Saturday after additional information came to light during an investigation into his efforts to help his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, deal with allegations of sexual misconduct. Cuomo, who hosted the station's most-watched primetime news show, admitted back in May that he had broken some of the network's rules in advising his brother how to handle the allegations from a public relations perspective. In journalism, it's considered a breach of ethics to use one's position to advocate for a personal cause or to conduct investigations for personal reasons. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. The second week of December looks to be a bit more comfortable than last week temperature-wise. Especially afternoon highs will hover way above the season norms. But cold mornings will continue, so be mindful of the gaps in readings and do dress accordingly. Air quality should be decent for most of the day, but toxic smog could blow in from overseas tonight, boosting dust levels in the capital region, Chungcheongdo provinces and Daegu, which could remain dusty through tomorrow. Meanwhile, a dry weather advisory remains in place along the East Coast while strong wind continues there, so stay alert for wildfires. There will be more clouds than sunshine in sub-zero mornings for many areas today, -2 degrees Celsius in Gyeongju, Chuncheon, and Daejeon this morning. Then highs will rise fast and going into double digits in most parts by the afternoon. And Busan and Jeju will be topping out at 16 degrees Celsius this afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Tuesday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We'll be here all week at the same time, 8 a.m. Korea time, and I'll be back with our next newscast at 10 a.m. Korea time. So until then, goodbye.
Everyone knows I'm passionate. Know why? Look at how passionate Koreans are. And you know I'm fast. Don't blink. Koreans move fast too. I'm creative on the pitch. People say I'm smart. Just look how smart Korea is. I aim to be spectacular for the fans. Why am I so fun? Is it because